A lot is known about what the Mayans did, but historians and researchers who study the things they left behind still have one question. What did the Mayans do for fun? The classical Mayan time lasted from 250 to 950 CE. The Mayan Empire covered most of Central America, including El Salvador, Honduras, southern Mexico, and all of Belize and Guatemala. The Mayans were defeated by the Spanish in the early 1600s, though. The Spanish conquistadors, especially Diego de Landa, wrote a detailed account of what life was like in the ancient Mayan society. In fact, de Landa's account has been called an ethnographic masterpiece. There are some things that the Mayans had in common with other ancient cultures, like the fact that they liked to bind their heads like the Egyptians did. But there are also many things that made Mayan life truly special. In this video, we'll discover things that Mayans did every day, such as what they ate, how they dressed, what they did for fun, and how they executed people as sacrifices. They got intoxicated with enemas made of fermented chocolate. The ancient Mayans drank something called balchi during ceremonies. The dried bark of the same named tree was used to make balchi. Honey and sometimes anise were used to make it sweet. This was like ambrosia for the Mayans. They thought it was a drink that the gods had given them. People also liked fermented drinks made with chocolate, which were sometimes mixed with drugs that made people feel high. They also drank pulque, which is an alcoholic drink made from agave that has been aged. Some evidence suggests that the Mayans also used enemas to get as drunk as possible. Many pieces of Mayan art show people giving themselves enemas. One anonymous Spanish conquistador wrote about the practice in Narrative of Some Things of New Spain and of the great city of Tenochtitlan. The men are great sodomites, cowards, and bored with drinking wine with their mouths, lie down and extending their legs, have the wine poured into their anus through a tube until the body is full. Ancient Mayans put gems in their teeth. In terms of teeth, the Mayans were very far ahead of their time, especially when it came to cosmetic dentistry. In the Mayan civilization, gems were often put into people's teeth. Today, no doctor in the Western world would do this. Because the doctor had to cut holes in the tooth enamel, this must have been a very painful process. The gems were held in place with resin made from plant sap. Several skulls were found with this beautifying procedure on them. These skulls showed that the Mayan dentists were very skilled. One thing they knew how to do was drill, usually with obsidian, without hurting the nerve in the tooth. In fact, tooth gems were a big trend in Sweden and the US in the 1990s, though they didn't require surgery. This shows that the Mayans were ahead of their time. They worshipped over 165 gods and dabbled in human sacrifice. Many gods were important to the Mayans. They believed in more than 165 different ones. But perhaps the most well-known thing about their faith was the practice of killing people as sacrifices to the gods. Children were often sacrificed because they were thought to be innocent. Kids would sometimes be taken from their homes and sold for as little as a bag of beans. The heart was usually taken out of the body by cutting open the chest. This was done by a priest called the Nacom, with helpers called the Chaks holding the subject down. The body would be thrown down the stairs if the offering took place on top of a pyramid. People who were slaves, prisoners of war, or just regular Mayan adults could be sacrificed. Diego de Landa, who wrote one of the most famous histories of the Mayans, saw people being killed as sacrifices. The victims were drawn on with blue paint and then led up the pyramid stairs for the rite. As part of offerings, people were drowned, beaten, and shot with arrows. Their hearts were also cut out. They ate delicious things like avocados, chocolate, and tamales. Native Mayans ate a lot of corn, squash, and beans, which they called the Three Sisters. In addition to these main foods, the Mayans also grew bananas, tomatoes, papayas, onions, garlic, chili peppers, and sweet potatoes. To eat, the Mayans had turkey, deer, iguana, dog, and peccary, which are wild pigs. They fished in lakes and the ocean as well. Atole, a warm corn gruel that was often served for breakfast, was the most basic native food. The Mayans were the first people to make corn tortillas and tamales, which are corn husks or avocado leaves filled with meat and veggies. Also, they were the first people to roast cocoa seeds to make chocolate. Because of this, you can thank the Mayans for some of your favorite meals today. Tattoos and piercings were a huge part of their culture. The old Mayans changed their bodies in pretty extreme ways. Tattoos would be on both men and women, but it was said to be very painful, so only the bravest Mayans would go through with it. Paint was used to make the pattern, and then it was cut out. After that, paint would be put over the wound. Men wouldn't get tattoos until they were married, and women would get tattoos on their upper bodies but not on their breasts. The Mayans had holes in their bodies not only to make them look better, but also as a gift to the gods. They used thorns or stingray spines to pierce their ears, genitalia, and mouths. After that, they write the blood on pieces of paper and burn them as gifts to the gods. They also had their bodies pierced to look better. The Mayans were very good at making jewelry, and both men and women had their lips, noses, and ears cut. Men were the only ones who wore nose and lip plugs, though. They took their ball games very seriously. A ball game called Paka-Tak was passed down to the Mayans from the Olmecs. The sport has been around for a long time. A 10-pound rubber ball and teams of 1 to 4 people played the game. The ball had to be kept moving and passed over a line, just like in volleyball. The players couldn't use their hands, though. Instead, they had to hit the ball with their hips and middle. This type of court was found in the Mayan city of Chichen Itza. It was about 315 feet long and 98 feet wide. Later, the Mayans added rings to the walls around the court for the ball. The game was over if the ball went through one of the rings. It was a rough game. When a person got hit by the ball and started bleeding inside, they would sometimes die. The POWs had to play too, and the losing team had to be sacrificed in a strict rite. Mayans bound children's heads to meet common beauty standards. The Mayans engaged in the practice of head binding, just like a great many other ancient civilizations, including the ancient Egyptians. The Mayans regarded individuals as beautiful if they had an extended cranium, a flattened forehead, and eyes that were slightly crossed. The Maya saw in this object a representation of an ear of corn, which they thought to be the source material from whence humans originated. They utilized a variety of techniques to accomplish this effect. To begin, though, they would place the flexible skull of a child between 2 boards of wood for extended periods of time and bind it there. They had some elaborate hairstyles. The Mayans cared a lot about how they looked, especially their hair. Thin black hair was worn long by both men and women. It was usually pulled back tightly in a ponytail to make the face look longer. The guys may have shaved the sides of their heads, but they left a long hairline in the middle. The guys also burned the hair at the hairline to make it look like the hairline was receding even more. Women wore their hair in braids, which were sometimes mixed with ribbon. People in the upper class wore fancy headdresses made of animal skins, gold, and other expensive materials. They used tobacco to treat asthma. The Mayans took lots of baths and were very clean. Following meals, they washed their hands and mouths, and before sacred events, they often took cold water baths or steam baths. But when it came to sickness, they thought it was a spirit-caused illness. To get rid of the disease, they would often cut themselves in different places, like the face. There were also a number of plant medicines for sickness. They thought that puking and getting drunk on balch would help with diarrhea and upset stomach. Also, they were wrong when they said that smoking could cure asthma. Clothes were sometimes embellished with jewelry. These simple clothes were worn by the poor Mayans, who were also called Memba Winikub. Men usually wore loincloths, but when it got cold, they would sometimes add ponchos. Short tops and long skirts or huipil were worn by women. Simple bands, necklaces, anklets, and earrings were all they wore. They got the fiber for the clothes from the agave plant. The leaves were used to prepare the fibers. They also used cotton plants. They spun both types of fabric into cloth and colored it with indigo and other colors. The Mayans wore these things every day. As you might expect, the elite wore more complicated clothes that were decorated with shells and jade. The clothes worn to religious events were also more complicated. Women made pottery while men worked the fields. There was a clear stratification of responsibilities, as was the case in the majority of ancient societies. Women of the commoners were responsible for the upbringing of their children, the upkeep of the household, the preparation of meals, the collection of honey from beehives, the creation of pottery, and the weaving of garments. During this time, men could be seen working in the fields, which were called milpas, and tending to their crops. The ancient Mayans did not have any beasts of burden or draft animals like horses or oxen. Therefore, this was not a simple chore for them to complete. They typically adopted the slash-and-burn method of farming because the only form of power they had available to till the soil was human muscle. They lived in residential compounds. Mayan commoners and rich nobles both lived in residential compounds. The wealthy nobles just had nicer places to live. Families with many members lived together in one house, which was made up of several buildings set up around patios and decks. People who lived in simple homes slept on straw mats on the floor. Most of the houses were made of limestone, which was easy to find in the area. The floor was packed white dirt, and the walls were made of clay and limestone to make them white. Transportation was on foot or by canoe. The Mayans built a network of elevated paved roadways known as sakbayab, which occasionally reached heights of up to 8 feet above the ground. These roads connected the various Mayan cities. Because the Mayans did not have draft animals, the products needed to be transported on these roadways were chained together with enormous numbers of slaves. They utilized canoes so that they could get to more remote locations. Canoes of up to 50 feet in length were constructed by the Mayans so that they could travel by water. We hope you liked this video. Subscribe to the channel if you're a history addict, and please let us know about what civilization or time period we should talk about. Also, watch another video here.